The first thing Alpha King Kael Draven asked after reclaiming his throne was not about the capital, not about the council, not about the nobles who had sworn loyalty too quickly, not about the armies waiting outside the northern gates. He asked, "Does Wynn Village still exist?" 3 days later, the Alpha King rode into the village where Elara Wynn was hanging wet laundry in the rain. The whole village knelt before him. The baker dropped his tray. The old miller pressed his forehead into the mud. Children hid behind their mothers' skirts. Elara did not kneel fast enough. Not because she was brave, because for one impossible second, the man on the black horse was not a king. He was the half-starved boy who used to steal burnt crusts from her kitchen window and glare at her as if she had personally insulted him by feeding him. Kael. Not the lost prince, not the Alpha King, Kael. He was taller now, broader, dressed in black royal armor with a wolf crown resting above dark hair. The boy's sharp bones had become a man's dangerous beauty, but the way he looked at her was worse than any crown, like he had crossed kingdoms for one face. Alara's hands tightened around the wet sheet. Rain slid down her sleeves. The village waited for her to bow. Instead, she heard herself say, "You forgot to eat breakfast again, didn't you?" A gasp broke through the villagers. One guard reached for his sword. Kael lifted one hand. The guard froze. The Alpha King looked down at Elara. For a moment, all the years between them seemed to stand in the rain. Then he said, "I am no longer the boy you can scold." Elara looked at the water dripping from his hair onto royal armor, then stopped standing in the rain like an idiot. Someone behind her whimpered. Kael's mouth did not smile, but his eyes changed, just enough for Elara to know he remembered everything. The broken roof, the winter hunger, the nights he shouted that he had never asked her to ruin her life for him. The morning he left without looking back. Kael dismounted. No one breathed as he crossed the muddy road toward her. He stopped close enough that she could see the small scar near his jaw, the one she had stitched after he fought 3 boys twice his size and refused to say why. "Elara Wynn," he said. The way he spoke her name was too careful, too reverent, too much like a debt finally come due. Elara stepped back, his expression tightened. "I came to bring you with me." The palace? Yes. As what? The question struck him. A king would have answered with title. A boy might have answered with anger. Kael answered like a man afraid of the only wound he could not command shut. "As the woman I have never forgotten." Elara almost laughed, not because it was funny, because if she did not laugh, she might believe him. "You became king and came back to repay an old bill?" Kael's jaw hardened. "Do not make this small. You were the one who left small enough to fit in my doorway and came back with a crown." He stepped closer. The air around him carried alpha power now. The village felt it and bowed lower. Elara forced herself not to. Kael noticed. Of course he did. He had always noticed when she refused to be frightened. His voice dropped. "Gratitude brought me back to find you." Alara's throat tightened. There it was, the word she feared. Gratitude. Then Kael said the thing that made every old scar inside her go still. "Love is why I could not bear the thought of finding you belonging to someone else." Elara could not answer, because years ago, she had given him everything she had so he could leave. And now he had returned with a kingdom in his hands, asking for the one thing she no longer knew how to give. Herself. Tessa Foyle found them later that evening, carrying a candle and an expression that said she had been watching from a doorway and had opinions. She looked at Kael the way old friends look at men who were once boys they had to tolerate. She said, before anyone asked. They were never mother and son. They were two strays under one leaking roof. One learned to leave. One learned to stay. Kael looked at Elara. Elara looked at the candle. Tessa looked at Elara after Kael left. Do not let the crown make you forget the boy was cruel to you too. Then softer. And do not let the cruelty make you forget he was never only cruel. Then she took herself home, having said the useful thing. That night, alone in her small healer's cottage, Elara let herself remember what Tessa had left out. The year she was 19 and Kael was maybe 16. Nobody quite knew his real age. The dying guard who had brought him had not known it either, and her parents were 3 months gone, in the same winter fever that took half the village, and Elara had stood in the empty house with 2 silver coins and a healing kit that belonged to her mother, and understood that she could either save herself or save him. She had sat with that choice for approximately 1 night. Then she had sold the silver coins. Then she had written to the training house in the valley and asked whether a nameless wolf with no registered bloodline could be accepted if someone paid his first year's board. She had worked a second job through the winter, copying pack law contracts for the village elder. She had developed a cough that lasted 6 weeks and told no one. She had received the letter from Moonbridge Academy. In the spring, the letter she had been waiting for since her mother first told her what healer law advocates could do for wolves, who had no one else to read their contracts, and she had looked at it for a long time. Then she had used the scholarship money to send Kael's second year's board instead. He did not know. She had never told him. The last time she had seen him before today was the morning he left for the valley. He had stood in the doorway with a travel pack she had assembled from pieces of her father's old equipment, and he had said, "You do not see me. You see a responsibility." She had answered, "Then grow up. Do not make that responsibility meaningless." He had not looked back. She had watched him walk down the mud road and disappear around the hill, and she had stood there until the cold became too obvious to ignore. And then she had gone inside and started her day. That was what loyalty looked like when it had no audience. Not noble, not beautiful. Just the next thing in front of you. The following morning, Kael came to her cottage without his guards. Elara was already working, because in Wynn Village the morning started before courtesy. He stood in the doorway of her workroom and looked at the walls covered in contract notes, her mother's notebook open on the table, and 3 healing debt petitions waiting to be read. He said, "Come with me. You have already asked that. You have not said no." She set down her pen. "I have not said yes. He came in without being invited," which was the kind of thing Kael had always done, not with aggression, but with the assumption that spaces he needed to be in would accommodate him. He looked at the contracts. He looked at the notebook. He sat down across from her without touching anything. "I could almost command it," he said. He said it carefully, testing whether she would hear the apology under the threat. "She did," she said. "So this is what you learned from all those years I ruined myself for you." He flinched. The Alpha King flinched like the boy she remembered. "No," he said then. "Come with me, not because I command it, because I am asking." Elara looked at him for a long moment. She recognized the difference between those 2 sentences. She had spent years learning to notice when men used the shape of a question to deliver an order. This was not that. This was a man who had been on the edge of using his power and had chosen actively not to. "Temporarily," she said. "Temporarily," he agreed. They both knew that word was doing a great deal of work. The palace was not what she had expected, which was a problem because she had expected to dislike it and found instead that it was simply large in the specific way of places where many serious things happen, and she could not quite dismiss it. The serious things included, on her second day, a poor widow from a border settlement arriving in the outer receiving hall with a healing depth contract. The court scribes would not see her. The duty healers said they only treated palace staff. The woman sat on a bench with the contract folded in her lap, and Elara walked over because she recognized the look of someone who had run out of places to ask. She read the contract. She had to read it twice. The first time she read it as a document. The second time she read it the way her mother had taught her to read them, looking for the place where the language pivoted from care to ownership. There was a clause on page 3, buried inside the section on extended treatment continuity, that bound the widow's eldest daughter to 6 years of clinic labor if the healing debt remained unpaid at the time of the debtor's death. The daughter was 9 years old. Elara took the contract. She went to the court registry and filed a formal illegal clause challenge under PAC Law, Section 42, which she had memorized at 14 because her mother said it would matter someday. It took 2 hours. The scribes argued. She read the relevant statute at them until they stopped. The widow's daughter was not bound. Kael appeared in the doorway of the registry hall as Elara was explaining to the widow what the outcome meant. She was aware of him the way she had always been aware of him. The specific weight of his attention, which had not changed even after he became someone who commanded armies. Later, he found her in the hall outside the registry. He said, "Finally seeing me?" She looked at him. "I am seeing why people fear you," she said. She paused. The registry scribes changed their position in under an hour. They were not afraid of me. They were afraid of you standing 2 hallways away. Kael was quiet for a moment. "I care more about whether you do," he said. Elara had no answer for that. The truth was that she had not been afraid of him in a long time. She was afraid of something else. She was afraid that the warmth she felt when he stood in the same room as her was not hers, that it was only the echo of all those years of needing to keep him alive, becoming something that only felt like love because she had practiced it for so long. Lord Renwick cornered her the following evening in the East Corridor. He was polite about it, which made it worse. He said the kingdom required stability, that stability required alliance marriages, and that a woman from Wynn Village with no registered bloodline and a collection of village healing contracts was a sentiment, not a strategy. He said it kindly. At the end of the corridor, a man she did not yet know by name had been watching. Elara would later learn he was Lord Cassian Vale, the PAC Law minister who administered healing depth contracts for border settlements. He had smiled when Renwick called her a village sentiment, not because he agreed with the insult, because he had already learned that courts dismissed village women more quickly than evidence. Elara thanked Renwick for his time and filed the observation away. Later, at dinner, she spoke calmly about which noble families had daughters of appropriate age and political value. She spoke as if she were discussing the assignment of a land treaty. Kael set down his fork. He said, "You speak as if choosing a queen is breeding a horse for court." Elara looked at him. "Kingdoms do not run on old debts," he said, "and if the woman I want is not a debt?" The table was quiet, she said. Then perhaps she deserves to know whether she is wanted for herself or for the silence that comes from finally settling an account. Kael did not answer. That night, She heard from Tessa, who had followed her to the capital because Tessa had always done what she decided to do, that Kael had spent 2 days before his return reading Elara's history, not just the years after his leaving. All of it. The Moonbridge scholarship. The land her mother had left. The second job through the winter. The bills paid against his training house accounts in amounts too small and too regular to be anything but carefully managed poverty. He had found all of it. He had not asked her first. She was in the North Library when he came to find her. He sat down across the table without speaking for a moment. Then he said, "I needed to know what I lived on." Elara did not look up. Food, coin, stubbornness. No. His voice was quiet in a way that cost him something. "Your future." She set down the contract she was reading. She had been expecting this conversation. She had been afraid of it, because the version of this conversation she had rehearsed in her head for years always ended with her crying, and she did not want to cry in front of someone who was now a king. "I chose those sacrifices," she said. "I know." "Then what are you asking me?" Kael said. "I am not asking you to thank me for returning. I am not asking you to excuse any of it. I am asking whether you believe there is a difference between a man who comes back to repay a debt and a man who comes back because leaving you was the thing he never learned how to stop undoing." Elara was quiet. "Those can be the same man," she said. "Yes," he said. "I know." He reached into his coat and set something on the table. A letter. The original. The Moonbridge Academy acceptance letter from 10 years ago. She had given her copy away in a moment of practical grief. She looked at it. "You opened my old application," she said. You thought you were giving me something. Yes, you opened the door without asking whether I was ready to stand in front of it." He said nothing. She said, "I will tell you when I am ready. It has to come from me." Kael picked up the letter. He placed it back in his coat. "Then it waits," he said. "That was not nothing. But it was not enough. Not yet." She left 3 days later. Not in the middle of the night. Not in anger. She packed her bag while it was still light, walked past 2 guards who looked uncertain about their mandate, and found Kael in the east courtyard where he was reviewing guard reports. She told him she was leaving. He said, "You survived." He was watching her. She said, "You survived." She paused. "You became king. My part is done." Kael set down the reports. He said, "Are you leaving because you want your life? Or because you think mine will be cleaner without you?" She could not answer, not because she did not have the words, because she was not sure which answer was true. Kael stood. He walked toward her. He stopped at a distance that was respectful and painful. "Then go," he said. Not a release, not permission, just the door held open. Because he had decided that holding it open was more important than his fear of her walking through it. She walked through it. The road south took her through border territory she had only read about. She stopped at a clinic 2 days out of the capital, a small building with a locked door and sign in Packlaw script that said Charitable Healing Services, which was the language debt holders used when they meant something else entirely. The patients inside were not recovering quickly. That was the first thing she noticed. Healing debts grew when patients did not recover, because non-recovery meant extended treatment, and extended treatment meant extended billing, and extended billing meant extended obligation. The families who had signed the contracts sat in the waiting room with the specific stillness of people who understood that the longer they sat there, the more they owed. The ledger on the front desk showed 12 families bound under extended treatment continuity clauses. She read the nearest contract under the pretense of assisting an elderly man with his paperwork. She recognized the language within 2 minutes. She had read it in the widow's contract at the palace. She had read it in her mother's notebook, in a warning Elara Wynn had written in the margin years before Elara was born. A wound can be stitched and still belong to the knife if the debt contract owns the hand that healed it. The administrator who ran the clinic was not present. She asked when he would return. The healer on duty said he came on Thursdays. It was Wednesday. She had one day. The shell company name on the incorporation papers pointed to a noble pack house with no healer staff of record. She had seen that name before, not in the widow's contract. In the side correspondence of a council report, she had been reviewing for Kael's reform documentation. Cassian Vale's name appeared on the incorporation charter of a holding company that owned the holding company that owned this clinic. 3 layers. Deliberate distance. She had enough. She found the archive room behind a locked supply door that yielded to a healer's acid compound, and patience Elara had taught her that particular compound for removing contaminated bandaging, which was not its only application. What she found inside took an hour to read and another hour to copy. Contracts she recognized by their structure. Correspondence she recognized by what it tried to conceal. A planning document she recognized by its author. She had already been here too long when she heard boots in the corridor. 2 sets. She worked faster. She copied the most critical clauses onto linen bandage cloth, because it was the only material she had enough of. She hid witness names inside the labels of medicine jars, alphabetized under standard compound names that would mean nothing to a noble house administrator, and everything to a magistrate who knew healer notation. She wrote the coded legal message in the treatment ledger, where to find the contracts, which clauses were illegal under PAC law, Section 42, and the 3 supplementary provisions she had identified, which magistrates had jurisdiction over border settlement cases, and how Cassian Vale would attempt to argue administrative oversight and distance the corporation from the clinic's practices. She wrote it in the healer notation her mother had taught her before she could read ordinary script, which looked like standard dosage records to anyone who had not been raised, reading both languages at the same table. She had just finished when the door opened. She did not resist. Resistance would have confirmed she knew something worth guarding. She sat down on the supply room floor, with her back against the shelves, and looked at the man who had opened the door. He was not Cassian. He was the kind of man Cassian employed to manage things Cassian preferred not to manage directly. Elara said, "I am a healer reviewing treatment records. You are welcome to check my credentials." He did not check her credentials. He took the ledger from the table. He did not find what she had written in it, because he did not know what to look for. He took her satchel. He left her the bandage cloth. She sat on the floor of the supply room and treated a patient who had been locked in there for 3 days with a medication reaction, using the compounds she kept in her coat pocket because she had been trained never to let a coat go out without them. The patient's name was Soren. He was 17. His debt contract had transferred to him from his mother. She told him what she had sent and where it was going. She told him his contract was illegal under 3 provisions. She told him the magistrates would come. He looked at her like someone who had stopped believing things would come for a long time. She said, "I know." Wait anyway. She was afraid. She simply chose not to let it own the room. Kael received the treatment ledger by Fast Rider the following morning. He sat with it for a long time before he understood what he was reading. He recognized her handwriting first. Then he recognized her notation system. The healer's shorthand her mother had developed, which Elara had once explained to him in exasperated detail when he made the mistake of calling her contract copying decorative. He had not known, when he was 16 and furious and eating food, she bought with money she had not told him she did not have, that she was becoming someone who could do this. He knew now. He called for magistrates, 2 senior pack law witnesses, and Captain Wren, who commanded his forward guard. He said nothing to the council about sentiment. He said, "A citizen has provided documentation of illegal healing debt contracts under Shell Corporation cover. We move on the legal framework she identified. We bring magistrates for evidence seizure, not soldiers for demolition." Renwick opened his mouth. Kael said, "Lord Renwick, if you would like to speak on behalf of the man whose correspondence appears in that archive, I suggest you consult a lawyer first." Renwick closed his mouth. They rode south. The clinic archive was exactly where the ledger said it would be. The magistrates secured the documents. The guards moved through the building, systematically, following the plan that Elara had outlined, and Kael had followed without changing, because she had understood the legal architecture of what they were walking into, and he had the sense to recognize expertise when he read it. He found her in the supply room. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the shelves, hands on her knees, watching the door. She had disabled the guard 30 minutes earlier with a bone needle and a sedative compound. The guard was sleeping against the far wall. She looked at Kael. She had small cuts on her wrists where the restraints had been. He crouched down. He did not reach for her, he said. "May I?" She nodded. He helped her stand. Outside, the magistrates were cataloging Cassian's correspondence, the Shell Packhouse records, the forced labor clauses, the pup service contracts, the threatened letters to Wynn Village, and the planning notes for the campaign to frame Elara as a village woman exploiting royal sentiment. Cassian was arrested in his capital residence by nightfall. Renwick, reviewing the documents afterward, said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "She reads pack law." He said it like a man recategorizing something. At the formal review the following morning, Kael said, in front of the assembled council, "Elara Wynn is not under my protection because she once protected me." He let the sentence land. "She stands here as the advocate who uncovered a crime this court ignored." The council was quiet. Renwick looked at his hands. Elara sat at the table and felt, for the first time in her life, the specific difference between being acknowledged as useful and being seen as a person who had authority in a room. They were not the same thing. She had spent a long time receiving the first. This was the second. Later, Kael found her alone. She expected him to say something about the arrest, the records, the council. He said, "Moonbridge opens its autumn session in 6 weeks. She looked at him. "I know. The application is mine to submit when I choose to." He stopped. He said, "Then I have nothing left to offer except myself, which I recognize is a complicated offer from someone who spent 10 years being your most expensive problem." Elara studied his face, the scar near his jaw, the lines around his eyes that had not been there when he was a hungry boy arguing with her over bread. She said, "If I stay now, I will wonder whether I chose you or the life you offered," he said. "Then go," she said. "You are not afraid I will not come back." He was afraid. She could see it, he said. I am more afraid of your return meaning anything less than what it would mean if you chose it freely. She packed her bag again. He drove her to the academy himself. He stopped at the gates, he said. The door is open. Enter or turn away. Both choices are yours, she asked. And you? He said. I will be here. He paused. This time. I am the one who waits. She stood at the gates for a moment. Then she walked through. Moonbridge Academy was harder than she had anticipated, and easier than she deserved, which was Tessa's assessment when she wrote from the capital, and which Elara found accurate. She was older than the other first-year students. She was behind in formal theory. She was ahead in everything that could not be taught in a classroom. The professor who ran the Pack Law practicum called on her twice in the first week to explain clause interpretation, and then stopped calling on her because her answers disrupted his lesson plan. She found the library the second night and did not leave until they locked it. She was behind in the formal historical analysis because she had not read the foundational texts, only their practical applications, and reading theory after practice was like learning the name of a tool you had been using for years. It made sense, but it took adjustment. She made the adjustment. She won her first case 4 months in. A family in a border settlement. 3 children. A healing debt contract with a forced labor clause that her mother would have recognized in 20 seconds. She stood before a pack magistrate in a room that smelled like old paper and made the argument that the clause was invalid under Section 42 and 3 supplementary provisions. She had prepared for 14 possible counter-arguments. The opposing advocate used 4 of them. She answered all 4. She won. She sat in the hallway outside the magistrate's office afterward, her case materials in her lap, and felt something she did not have a name for. Not triumph exactly. More like the specific satisfaction of a door that has been locked for a long time opening the way doors are supposed to open. She wrote to Tessa about it. She wrote to Kael about it. His letter came back the same day. He asked about the specific legal argument she had used on the 4th counter-argument. Not when she was coming back. Not whether she had thought about him. Just, tell me how you read the clause, she told him. He wrote again. She wrote back. That was how they spent the year. She learned later, from Tessa, that he had asked Renwick to review the supplementary provisions she had cited in her first case, and had quietly forwarded them to the Council Reform Committee. He had not mentioned it to her. He had not made her work into his. He had simply paid attention to it. That was not nothing. When she returned to the capital, Kael was waiting in the garden of a small stone cottage outside the city walls. Not the palace, not a throne room, a restored building with a healer's sign over the door, and enough room for a consultation space and a contract reading library. A place she could enter or leave. She walked up the path. He was standing near the door with his hands in his pockets, which was a posture she recognized from years ago, when he was trying not to look like he needed something. He still did it. She found that more endearing than she could explain. She said, "Did you eat?" He narrowed his eyes. "Do not start acting like my caretaker," she said. "I learned from the best." He smiled. Not the careful almost smile from the rain. The real one she had seen perhaps 4 times in all the years they had shared a leaking roof and a mutual difficulty. He held out his hand. He did not pull. She took it. She felt the bond then. Properly, the way you feel something you have been walking past for years and finally stop to look at. It was quieter than she had expected. Not the lightning she had heard described in pack stories, just warmth. The specific warmth of something that had been patient for a long time and recognized that patience had been the right choice. She said, "I am not here because you need me. I know. I am not here because I owe you. I know that too. I am not here because a bond says I belong." Kael looked at her. "I know," he said. "I hid it when I first sensed it. Months before I came back to Wynn Village. I sat with it for 3 weeks and decided I would not use it." She had suspected. "Why?" He said. "Because I spent half my life being the debt you carried. I would not make fate another weight on your shoulders." She held that for a moment. Then she said, "I came because I wanted to." He looked at her, not at the crown he had once crossed a kingdom to return, not at the girl who had kept him alive through stubbornness and sacrifice, at her, the woman she had become after she had chosen herself first. He said, "Then I will spend the rest of my life remembering the difference." Behind them, the healer's sign moved in the wind. Above the cottage door, in letters she had chosen herself, Wynn Healing House. Contract reading and advocacy for poor packs. She had not needed his name for it. She had not needed his land or his title or his gratitude. She had only needed the time to find out who she was when no one else's survival was the first thing on her list. Now she knew. And standing in the garden with his hand in hers and the future spread out ahead in the specific shape of a life she had written herself, she found that knowing made the choice very simple. She had stayed once because he needed her. She had come back because she wanted to. And that was the difference. That was the whole thing. 1 year on, the Wynn Healing House was known in 3 border settlements. Kael's reform limiting healing debt contracts had passed with stronger provisions than Cassian's network had believed possible, because Elara had spent a winter at Moonbridge building the legal argument that made it structurally irrefutable. Tessa ran the Wynn Village branch. The Moonbridge Academy had opened a scholarship for older students, people who had given up formal education for family duty, because Elara had written the proposal and submitted it to the academic board without telling Kael, and it had passed on its own merit. Cassian's network was dismantled. The contracts were voided. The families were free. One afternoon, a young girl sat in the consultation room of the Wynn Healing House and said she could not study for the academy examinations because her family needed her to work. Elara knelt beside her, not as a martyr. As someone who knew the exact weight of that sentence, she said, "Helping them should not mean erasing yourself." She paused. "You can love your family and still take up the space you were meant to occupy." The girl looked at her. Kael stood in the doorway of the next room, listening. He did not interrupt. He did not claim the moment. When the girl had gone, he looked at Elara. She looked back. She was not the girl who had stayed behind. She was not the woman who had given herself away until there was nothing left to give. She was the woman who had come back with her own name. She had chosen that name herself, and she wore it like the future it was. She once gave up her future so a lost boy could live. Years later, the king he became gave that future back, and only after she chose herself did she choose him.